Jay will come up to talk about the restoration of the film. Jay scored this new version. He was the one who got the original intertitles translated and oversaw the digital restoration of the original film. Jay has spent his career working in all phases of production and post-production. He has directed 14 feature films, won the first Interactive Academy Award for his Titanic documentary narrated by Patrick Stewart, edited Bronx Cheers, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Short, won an Emmy for his film of Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Birthmark, and was included by the Ohio State University in its permanent exhibition, Buckeye Brilliance, among other distinguished graduates in the Student Union. Jay has scored 59 films and won awards for 19 of these for Best Music Score. Music came first, as Jay played baritone horn in concert bands from the 4th grade on. Film music attracted him to films for their orchestral but often experimental and modern scores. He took console organ lessons for 3 years in high school and began scoring his own and other people's films in film school. Last year we showed a restoration of an incredible Danish sci-fi silent called The Heaven Ship, another film that I wasn't aware of, so thank you, Jay, for the good work, and would you please welcome Jay Woelfel.
Thank you very much. It is Poe's birthday. I have a birthday card for him later. He says he'll stick around for it, because this is my only chance. And lo, it is a gala night, amid the lonesome latter years. An angel throng, that's you, bewinged, bedight, in veils and wrapped in tears, sit in a theater to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra, that's me, breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. That's from The Conqueror Worm, which at one point I thought was actually part of Fall of the House of Usher. Fall of the House of Usher has a poem within it, as do some other Poe stories. And I actually included some of that poem in this, which is The Haunted Palace, which is a H.P. Lovecraft film with a Poe title made by Roger Corman. The Raven was a huge pop culture hit. A long kind of narrative poem of that sort of dark subject matter. It was sort of like Squid Game or Lost when it first came on. It was, of course, ripped off in many publications which didn't pay Poe any money to put it in there. But it was a huge, I guess they didn't have water coolers quite yet back then. His most successful story is one that we don't really talk about much today. My friend John Streisig brought it up to me, called The Gold Bug, which is sort of an adventure mystery story involving an island. But during his life, that was turned into a play. So that was his biggest commercial hit. Fall of the House of Usher comes from 1839, which is before a lot of the other stories we would know. So it's kind of early in his career. He died about 10 years later. Poe, after he died, critics sort of apologized for some of his dark subject matter, like The Black Cat, which is a story, by the way, no magazine would ever publish today because it deals with animal torture. I lost my train of thought. I'm so disturbed by The Black Cat. But the whole thing was they dismissed him as a madman and a drunk. Oh, he was drunk. Poe had one of the great, weird, kind of Gene Hackman-esque strange deaths, which nobody's ever found dead wearing somebody else's clothing after being gone for a couple of days. But critics wanted to excuse all of that, which they have done with other writers of dark fiction. Other people since Poe have tried to write poetry as part of their output. James O'Brien, who's an excellent writer, except his poetry is pretty terrible. H.P. Lovecraft wrote a lot of poetry, which is not great. Robert E. Howard also. But Poe, I think, really sort of brought that into existence. And Poe felt that poetry was a particularly great medium to deal with this kind of melancholy or supernatural subject matter. Just like Hitchcock said he chose doing thrillers and suspense films because this was a genre where you could be experimental and do these things which you could not get away with in any other genre. So rather than just be very Freudian and just say that they had bad childhoods or whatever, these are sort of artistic and to a certain degree, commercial choices, because anybody who wants to, you need a patron. Poe, of course, didn't get a solid patron. Hitchcock had many patrons and made much money. Poe was what they used to call a dipsomaniac, which is a phrase I love. Unlike, say, like Malcolm Lowry, Under the Volcano, if you know that movie or that whole story, this was a guy who people said, it wasn't that he drank a lot, it was that he was never not drunk. He was just always drunk, constantly. And it took him decades, literally, to write that book. Poe was somebody who would be like a lightweight, have a couple beers and he's gone. There's a Russian composer named Modest Mussorgsky, who also was a dipsomaniac, who did a orchestral and choral setting to the bells, which is quite interesting. Mussorgsky went to the Betty Ford Clinic of Russia at the time, and on his birthday, the staff loved him so much that somebody gave him a drink. And he couldn't stop, and it killed him. Kind of like a drug addict who, see, it doesn't pay to be a nice guy. This film is the first feature-length film made from any of Poe's stories. The director, Jean Epstein, was Polish. His mother, I believe, was Catholic, and his father was Jewish. He was gay. So you just kind of imagine the forces at work here. He found a home in Paris in the 1920s, which of course was, as opposed to say like Vienna or one of these sort of storied centers for art in Europe, Paris was very non-discriminatory in that way. So it's a good place for him to be. Like Truffaut or Claude Chabrol later, he started as a writer. Now this is the early days of film. It's silent film, so film has to kind of think, why is this an art? And he was one of the early people to think about and write about, not just about film as an art. And what he felt film was uniquely, what made it an art specifically, was the use of time and motion. So you'll see in this film, he doesn't use either in a natural way. He uses slow motion, which is kind of startling years before Kurosawa or then Peckinpah would use slow motion. And so he plays with time, but this is a key function of what he felt film art should be. He had had some commercial failures leading up to this, so he was looking to have a hit because he owed people a lot of money. This is his best known and most famous film. It, however, was not a commercial success. You'll see some choices he made in the movie in terms of some changes to the story. There's actually, to pad it out, Louis Buñuel, the famous surreal Spanish director. This was his first professional job. He'd made Andalusian Dog before this, but this is his first, like, get hired to work on a real movie. Some people have said that he co-directed the film, he co-wrote it. He often gets credit as co-writing, which I give him credit for here. Buñuel dismissed his hiring as being, I was just hired to do an assistant on creatively, I'm not responsible. I don't know what Epstein ever had to say about Buñuel, but I think the truth's probably somewhere in between the two. Epstein should not have all the credit taken away from him, but this in some ways you might go like, oh, Buñuel did everything. The same year, 1928, there's an American short film made of Fall of the House of Usher, which is also very surreal, almost more so than this film. It's quite excellent. You can find it on YouTube, made in America, but it's a short. Both of them make a key change to the story, which I guess I'll give away. Fall of the House of Usher is largely about this sort of degenerating family that may or may not involve incest between the sister and the brother who are sort of cooped up in this collapsing mansion, which is collapsing just as they are. So in both of these films, they change it to his wife. So it's not Usher's sister who's involved, but it's his wife, which kind of tells you that they knew this is kind of a hot button subject. Poe in his story has a lot of kind of pop culture references, as he does in a lot of his work, although of course this is so separated from us now that we might forget this kind of thing. In the story, he tells specifically that the piece that Usher is playing on his guitar is this piece by Carl von Weber called The Last Waltz, which is actually the last piece of music von Weber ever wrote. If you do a search for that piece of music of von Weber, the only reason it will come up is because it's mentioned in Fall of the House of Usher. So I wanted to actually, I looked up what that piece of music was. I had some of it recorded live on a guitar and then sort of used it and worked it into the entire score. I don't know why nobody ever used it. The original piece actually becomes quite manic at the end. But then Poe and the movie sort of write their way out of really using it at the end where people get really crazy because he's reading a sort of tale which involves loud sounds. Roderick Usher has kind of a thing where like, he's hypersensitive to noises. You'll see being a silent film that the directors have to work to sort of let you hear things, especially a story where it's all about what this character is hearing. So you see the way he stylizes and literally like breaks his images apart. In scoring the film, I also do some sound effects, so it becomes a matter of like, if a bell's ringing, am I just gonna let the bell, you know, the bells, go on? I mean, the visuals are sort of, so I sort of pick and choose where I will use an actual sound or where I will suggest it or just ignore it altogether, because that's built into silent film. This is 1928. The same year, the first French feature-length sound film was released, I believe called The Waters of the Nile. So this is the beginning of the end for silent film. Oh, Epstein, I'll talk later about what the rest of his career became. But yeah, he's a fascinating guy, and the last several years, he's been going through a resurgence. There's actually been a better master which I could work from to redo another version of this film. The time I did this, it had not been done. The release version had, in America, had running narration. So the intertitles are in French, and there's somebody telling you in English with a French accent what's being said. I knew enough French to go, yeah, that's kind of what they're saying, but Poe and the sort of style of the narration is very specific. And if you're telling somebody something, you're already going to lose something. So I thought, this is a silent film. Let's get these intertitles translated. This is in some ways, as I've discovered, by a rude Italian festival who would not ever show a film with digital translated intertitles, even though they had already done so, which I pointed out when I said goodbye to them rather rudely. The intertitles, I've matched the original layout and the fonts as much as possible. So you're seeing, and I tried to stick very literally as much as I could to the choices of words. Aided and abetted by Rick Moses, who is here in the back there somewhere, who knows French, and his wife also speaks French. That's what I chose to do, so you could actually watch it as a silent movie, the way it was originally intended to be seen. The tinting is my choices largely. It's interesting here, I think the friend of Usher is like an old American guy who's kind of comic relief, which is also not really in the story. There's also I mentioned the black cat, and there's a real kind of in-joke thing, which I was sort of shocked in this film, which you'd only get if you know the black cat story. Poe didn't just write horrible stuff like this. He wrote a lot of black comedies. Like I said, he wasn't really although he had some horrible tragedies in his life, his writing is more diverse than, of course, the ones which we embrace so much today. Especially, one thing I want to mention, if I can find it, is one of the last pieces he wrote. Eureka, a prose poem. This is kind of a proto-Big Bang Theory. Poe went and performed this and read it to people. It's worth finding. I read everything Poe ever wrote, and then one day found this Eureka thing and thought it was a joke, and it's not. But he did it as a lecture. I don't think it was published until after he died. But yeah, this is kind of where the Big Bang Theory starts. Something he said in this that really kind of still means something to me is, part of his whole point is that if you try to understand a massive confusion which life is, you have no hope. But if you start from what simple things are and start to connect the dots, then suddenly everything will make sense to you. And he felt the universe was like this too, that it started literally as a little particle that exploded and expanded and is still exploding and expanding. So yeah, Carl Sagan, he never wrote The Raven. But I will be here afterwards to give a birthday card to Edgar Allan Poe, which I thought I'd never get to do. And I also have some CDs of the score if you really want to hear it. The score is, it uses guitar throughout it. some medieval sort of instruments and a little bit of brass. And it's also blatantly at times a synth score too. The last sort of score I did like this. I don't think I did one before it like this. So welcome to the Usher people, and now the more politely married couple in the House of Usher. Enjoy.